Great, we're just waiting for the 8 o'clock mark. There it is. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order this August 24th meeting of the Whatcom PUD. Thank you all for attending. Let's start with the pledge. And I think, Mike, you're going to do the pledge today?
Yes, I will, Phil. Thank you. If everyone will please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So the next item on our agenda is to review and approve the agenda. Are there any comments to the agenda? Steve?
Commissioner?
Yeah.
I would like to ask if you could add under old business, the broadband update.
Great.
And we expect to have Chris Walker from NOAANET joining us. Are
there any other suggestions to the agenda? Mike?
Yes, I'd like to add a little bit to my commissioner's report. I said some things that I thought were important for us and the public to know. And so I would like to have put back in there that I mentioned that people are having hardships during the drought, dry wells, and that I was informed that people to recharge their wells were spending $300 per week doing that, and some people are doing it twice a week for a total of $600. And that I had made the request that if the PUD could do something to provide future potable water, maybe at locations like Plant 1 or Grandview, to maybe assist people in the future under those conditions of drought, emergency, dry wells. I would like to see that put back in to the minutes, please.
Okay, so we'll let's get the agenda approved first, and then we'll take your comment on the minutes, if that's okay, Mike, on the minutes approval.
I apologize. You should.
Are there any other changes to the agenda?
None from me.
Okay,
And
so
I can make a motion to approve the agenda
great.
with the addition of the
as-
broadband update.
Great, thank you. Mike, we want to second that?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the revised agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
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 And the motion carries. Let's move on to the consent agenda. And I believe Mike has already stated a request for modification to the meeting minutes of August 10th.
Correct. And I think you probably have that down already.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to get John on the system and I apologize. I'm on the phone.
Commissioners, how about if we remove the minutes for August 10th off the consent agenda right now, and then Ann can go back and listen to the recording from the meeting and add those comments back in and bring them back to you at your next meeting.
Sure, that's great.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the consent. I'll make a motion to approve the approval of claims for August 24th, and that we table the approval of the meeting minutes for August 10th until our next commission meeting.
great. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Great. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? So all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 That motion carries. And so let's move on to public comment. Ann, can you help us with the public comment?
Commissioners, I think she's still trying to, she's still working with John Sitka
Yes,
needs-
and I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, me either.
Thank you, Ann.
I'm just gonna give it one more second, everyone, just to make sure that nobody does. raise their hand. Great. Let's go ahead and close public comment and let's move on to old business. So the first item is the general manager appointment process update. I don't know, John's gonna do that or?
Well, I was expecting John to just give us a brief update, commissioners, but maybe we can go back to that when John gets on. So he's still not able to get on. So
Oh, okay. That's a John that, it was our John that,
yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
all right.
And I apologize. We're still trying to get him connected.
No problem. And can you just let me know, interrupt and let me know when John's on, just to make sure I see it and then we'll return back to item 5A when he is on. So let's move on to 5B, which is a new item we added, which is a broadband update. Is Chris available?
I believe Chris is on.
Good morning, Chris.
Commissioners, I think that a couple of you have had an opportunity to talk to Chris, but we're welcoming Chris Walker with NoaNet to join, I'll say it this way, to join our broadband team. And Chris has, as you are aware, has a number of years experience working in telecommunications, and most of those years, I think, with NoaNet. And the only thing negative that I can say about Chris today is that he decided to move out of Linden too many years ago. So, but we just like to have Chris sort of do a meet and greet to all of you this morning. And if Commissioner Deshmani, if you want to take add any more comments before just letting Chris just chat with you all this morning.
No, that's great. Let's just go ahead and get started. Chris, thanks for attending this morning.
Glad to be
And-
here. Thank you.
You know, we've had a chance to have a brief discussion, and we've also planning to have a follow-up to talk more about the data mapping exercise. But I look forward to you're attending tomorrow's steering team meeting, correct?
Correct. I'll be there.
With Christine and Steve on our side, right? Is Brian attending that meeting as well, Steve?
No, Brian won't, but I will be.
Okay. So, you know, Chris, you have a good visibility into what's going around the state. And one of the things that I've wondered about, you know, Whatcom County, we're relatively, it seems to me that we're behind on the broadband ball. And I guess the first question is, do you agree that Whatcom County is a little bit behind as far as other counties, particularly in Western Washington, as it relates to broadband efforts? And what's your thoughts about how we catch up and become a leader here in this county?
Sure. I mean, I think the reality of many of our counties in our state is that we have pockets of unserved and underserved residences that, as we all know, need bandwidth. I think bandwidth and the opportunity to access the internet and all the things that come with it are incredibly important for quality of life and economic prosperity. And your county, much like a number of counties in our state and across the United States as a whole, have fallen behind, specifically in our more rural areas, although that doesn't mean in some of our urban pockets we don't have shortcomings when it comes to broadband availability and affordability as well. You know, I think from my perspective, it is important for us as community leaders to really understand and recognize what the problem is. And you mentioned a second ago about mapping. I think the federal mapping system that identifies where broadband problems are in our community lack accuracy. And as leaders, I think we have a responsibility to identify the incorrectness of those and then make intelligent decisions on how we're going to grow and develop broadband accordingly. How that may look, I think the steering committee that you just identified has a lot of great talent on there. And through that group of collaborators, I think some great recommendations will come out of it. I do like the idea at the beginning is to really understand what the existing broadband landscape looks like, what the existing problem looks like, and then looking to see what systems are out there that we could leverage and potentially grow and develop to provide the connectivity to the areas that so sorely need it. But time will tell, and Tool, I'm excited to be here and help the PUD out.
One of the things that the steering committee and the head from the port, Gina, has talked about recently in the last couple of months is responding to the requests from both the community and just the common sense awareness that we have to think about last mile and essentially retail access to data. The original study that the PUD co-funded and the original focus of the port was backbone, which is still very important. In no way is that not important. However, the executive director of the port, Rob Fix, as well as Gina, have both talked about how the backbone, assuming it's continues to be built out, still begs the question of how we get last mile connectivity. And so the port is added to their scope, and I'm sure part of what the PUD wants to will be also helping to understand and study is how to deal with the last mile piece. That's very much a rural versus urban difference, because there is a lot more last mile connectivity in urban centers. So what are your thoughts about things that other counties are doing that Whatcom County can do as far as addressing the last mile problem?
Well, the core of any problem in any community really is the lack of infrastructure. And we throw out terms like backbone and middle mile and distribution and last mile. They all really mean the same thing, is that we have infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to solve the problem. None of the systems work without all of the infrastructure problems being developed and created, with or without it all being the same organizational entity that does so. So I think from my perspective, we want to identify what middle mile and backbone systems are available that gets us to the communities that are considered unserved. Because building your last mile solutions before the backbone and middle mile is a little bit of a cart before the horse type model. And there's potential and opportunity for a multitude of different organizations to build this Rubik's Cube of fiber systems to deliver the broadband. So and I think from my perspective, it is really about the development of that infrastructure necessary to serve. In our state, we have plenty of service providers that provide innovative solutions for telecommunications and broadband to consumers. What we lack is infrastructure for them to utilize. And in many ways, and your county is probably the same, we really look to public benefit network development to overcome that hurdle, specifically if there are areas in which the private sector can't afford to get a return on their investment.
And of course, that public sector development being open access.
Being an open access network. Yeah, much like what we see in our state, PUDs, ports, municipal broadband networks, and so forth.
And what's the limit from your perspective, what's the limit of the open access model in Whatcom County? Like, what are situations where it will be unrealistic for us to be able to achieve open access on the backbone?
Well, open access thrives when there are two qualified organizations fulfilling the needs of the consumer. The consumer needs affordable, reliable, broadband telecommunication services to their home and to their business. And when we look at open access assumes that there is a public benefit network that is building the infrastructure that meets those requirements, right? Affordable and reliable and so forth. But the second component is also an active and qualified and trustworthy set of retail service providers that can provide a competitive environment for the consumer to have a choice. And that gives them the ability to procure the service that they're looking for at a rate that's competitive, that provides a high level of customer service and adequately meets their needs. And so the secret ingredient, other than the term infrastructure, the secret ingredient is really having those two sets of champions. A champion being an open access public benefit network, and then the second champion are the retail service providers that desire to serve the community.
I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And basically, you're saying Champion B actually is not one retail service provider. It's having a community of retail service providers, and it's the community that creates the competitive demand.
That's right. And as we become more and more rural, the opportunity for more competition, decreases just because that's just the nature of being rural. But in our state, we have had so much successful adoption of public benefit networks, PUDs, ports, municipals, that many retail service providers have really embraced that model and have been quite successful. Some of our PUDs in the center of the state have upwards of 15 qualified, competent retail service providers that resell that open access network. That, of course, varies. Some communities are more rural than others, and the volume and quantity of those partners are less. But as stewards, we work towards trying to encourage them to come into our community and help grow our broadband needs, solve our broadband needs. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chris. I took quite a bit of the time here, and we have it's not constrained. I want to make sure now that I leave room for my colleagues to also ask questions. Thank you, Chris, for answering mine.
My pleasure.
Chris and I already had a conversation a few days ago, and Chris, just really grateful to have you on board, and looking forward to the steering committee meeting tomorrow. And speaking of broadband, my bandwidth does not seem to be very good, so I'm going to be turning my video off just to hear better. So I apologize for that if you're not able to hear me, and because I have to have my video off. Not quite sure what's going on.
And we'll let you know if we're not hearing from you. We'll wait for you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Mike, any thoughts or questions on the subject of broadband?
Well, the only thing is, one, welcoming Chris to the team. Chris, I'm really looking forward to you working with the PUD, the port, at our broadband steering committee. It feels good to see everyone come together in the community and start to look at ways that we can achieve this. I still get people calling me, still get people questioning, where are we at? And I'm happy to report to them that we have an interlocal agreement with the port, PUD, NOAANet, and other people are showing interest. So I'm getting good feedback from people saying, good, we're doing something. So thank you for being part of that team.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Steve, any comments or questions on your behalf? Or I noticed that John has just joined, so we can move on to 5A after we're done here.
I'm done.
Thank you, Mike. Steve, anything else?
No, thank you. No, I don't have anything else. Chris, looking forward to having you on board tomorrow and kicking this thing off. Really looking forward to it.
Yep, me too. I will see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Chris.
My pleasure.
Then let's go back to item 5A, John.
Thank you, Commissioners. I apologize. I've heard everything since the beginning, but we're having a wireless connectivity here at our office, and I'm having to log in through the coffee shop across the street from my office. But I do not have an update from the general manager appointment process in terms of what applications have been received. It was posted about a week little over a week ago last Friday on various websites through Prothman and their social media. It was lodged onto the PUD's website, I think at the end of last week or first of last week or just the week prior. So it's out there for people to review the advertisement and waiting to hear what our response level is, but it's very early in that time frame.
Thank you, John.
And I'm having a similar issue, so I may not be on video, but I'll be listening.
Great. And I'm just going to check with Commissioner Grant to see if Commissioner Grant has any questions for you, John. If you're talking, I can't hear you, Christine.
Christine is muted right now, so.
I didn't catch what you said, Atul.
I was just asking
Very-
if you have questions for John on his update.
No, I have no questions. I've been sharing the job posting widely and nothing else to report at this time.
Great, thank you. Mike, do you have anything? Great, and I'm just being extra careful to make sure we hear from everybody, everyone, just to make sure, because we are having some connection issues, and I'm just explicitly asking to make sure that we hear from everybody. So thank you, John. Let's proceed with the agenda then to new business.
Commissioners, this is item 6A, and this is the water use efficiency goal setting public forum. It's one of the next steps in developing and finalizing the water system plan update. And I think with that, I'll just kick it over to Dave Olson. And Dave, I see Kurt Schoenfelter is on as a participant or an attendee, but not as a panelist. Will you need him to be brought in as a panelist? Oh, he's okay. Ann just left him in. Sorry. All right, Dave, you want to kick this off?
Sure. Morning, Commissioners. We are
Good
here to address a specific requirement of the drinking water system. Drinking water again for the public. And this is found in Chapter 4 regarding water use efficiency program, and more specifically, the setting of water use efficiency goals and performance measures. So I'll just give you a slide of requirement here as I'm navigating my way to share my screen. Or not.
My screen froze up for a minute there. I apologize.
That's right. We'll get back to this one here and share.
There you go.
Let's see if I can get the presentation back online here. And if you all can confirm you see something, a title page.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And so we're just going to jump into a quick requirement. We'll identify the two components of this, and this should only take hopefully a few minutes. So the Washington, let me get all of your faces off my screen here. So the Washington State Legislature passed in 2003 the municipal water law to reform the state's water laws. And it accomplished two key things here related to this subject. And it added flexibility in the use of municipal water rights to serve growing communities by eliminating some of the risk of losing those municipal water rights to the state. And in exchange for this water right flexibility, the law requires municipalities to use water efficiently. And under the municipal water law, it states that water use efficiency requirements apply to all systems defined as municipal water systems. And of course, the PUD is a municipal water system. And I just have those references there for you. Related to Department of Health, and that previous slide was Department of Ecology related Department of Health. Of course, we know we are supposed to do a water system plan and update it every 10 years under the Washington Administrative Code. And as part of the planning document, you must develop and implement a water use efficiency program, which is in your water system plan draft that you've all had a chance to review, I trust. And water use efficiency goals and performance measures must be established by the elected governing board, which is you folks, through a public process at least every 6 years. And so that's why we're here to doing this in a public process as opposed to just simply a component of the water system plan. And you'll note there, I suspect that it says this is done every 6 years, whereas the water system plan is updated every 10 years. They are off cycle, partly because the water system plan process used to be a 6-year planning process, and now it's moved to a 10-year planning process that fits other entities. So they're just out of sync. We just have to deal with that. Hopefully they'll change that, although that's legislative and who knows how that'll go. And so to jump right in here, just we've really only got a couple of slides for you. The two key components we're going to talk about today are the supply side, which is between your source and your source meter, in this case being the Grandview well and the customer meters. And then there is the demand side, which is that water that's consumed by the customers from the point of delivery, which is the customer meter. So that would be that they have control on their side. And so just as a quick reminder, we are talking about water use efficiencies for our drinking water customers. And so as you're familiar with our water system, even though we have the Cherry Point service area, we don't have any active water systems out there for potable other than the Praxair, which is a single well Group B system. And so generally, while this would apply there, we're focused on the Grandview Northgate service area. So that's just a reminder of where our focus point is today when we talk about customers. And so just to highlight the supply side and demand side individually, which will be related to the water use efficiency recommendations here in a slide or two. The supply side being between the source meter and the customer meters, we refer to this as non-revenue water. And that's primarily because you have these different types of activities between the source and the customer. And so, for example, you may have unauthorized use through fire hydrants or service connections, and unauthorized is generally not that you're aware of. And so it's not uncommon in the industry for hydro seeders and people just to hook up to a fire hydrant and not let you know. Or service connections that somehow were legacy connections. But in the case of the PUD, we're not aware of either of these because the fire hydrants are on the non-potable industrial system, and the service connections, we're not aware of any that are unauthorized. So essentially, this would be a non-issue for the PUD. Distribution system flushing is another item that often systems will just flush and not keep track of that water. So it may appear to be lost water, but in your case, you have a thorough system of being able to meter flushing points. And so you can account for that water. So it's not unaccounted for. And then the focal point here related to the Department of Health regulations that exist, and I'll mention that in a minute, is that a distribution leakage can be a significant component of water use efficiency. And so here in the table, over the 6-year study period, and I realize we're in the 2021 period, but when we started this is the readily available data. And you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner that of the last 3 years, you have a 4.3% what we call distribution leakage number. It's unaccounted for, and we're assuming that it's attributed to leakage, which is the reasonable assumption. And more importantly, from my perspective, being in the water industry on a day-to-day basis, you'll see that the trend from 2016 through 19 is trending down. And that is attributed to the very good work of your distribution water staff and the aggressive policy of identifying leaks and fixing them. And so I will just highlight right now, when in advance of the goals, is that the Washington State Department of Health has set a maximum leakage of 10%. And many utilities are 20, 30, and 40% leakage. And so you are the envy of the water distribution industry for potable water at 2.9% in 2019, which is the most recent data we have here for you. That is very excellent. And other than a brand new system that just tested everything, it's very rare to see somebody this low in their distribution system. And I'll pause there. We only have like 3 slides left, but I see a tool and a couple of people went off mute, and I suspect there may be a question or two.
Okay, so I'd also like to first check to see if any of the other commissioners have questions. Christine, Mike?
I do have a question. Thanks for when I was preparing for the meeting, I was gonna ask you, how do we measure this? But so you've explained that, but I guess I just wonder with our goals, we have the 10% distribution leakage rate. Would it make sense for us to set a distribution leakage rate goal that's lower than 10% since we're at 2.9% for 2019?
This is a pragmatic question for staff. And I will tell you that you get to a point, and I'll just give you a very simple number. If you imagine that you were looking for a 1,500 gallon a day leak, to put that in perspective, that's 1 gallon per minute. And so while you could, and imagine if you had 3 or 4 or 5 half-gallon minute leaks, if you were to go to your kitchen tap and realize how little water that is, and to be able to locate that water in a distribution system with either wet ditches year-round or stuff that it'll certainly drain, it's virtually impossible to tighten up to 0. That said, your folks could have, as part of their already proactive program, they could do some very basics, which is simply using a listening device where you would simply listen to hydrants and services to determine if there were common leaks. But again, that is, given how low yours is, I'm not sure how pragmatic it would be or to do that, although there's some very straightforward processes that you could do periodically. So that would be my response to that.
So you feel like leaving it at 10% is more realistic, just in given that 2019 was a very good year, but we might have other years where it's not quite as good. So it might average out to something a little higher.
That is correct. And I will confess that consistent with all the other utilities I work with, some large, some small, thousands of customers, for example, or other entities that do these, it's very, very common to use that. Certainly would have no objection to lowering it, but this is the common practice to meet the state level that they have in their documentation. It seems to be consistent, but there's no reason why it couldn't be adjusted. But I would recommend that we leave it at the
10%. Commissioner.
Okay, well, thank you for putting it in context for me, Dave. And I do also just want to say that, congratulations to the staff for having a distribution leakage rate that's so low. That's impressive.
This is Rebecca. I'd just like to speak briefly to the fact that we did submit our annual report for 2020, and our 3-year average, I'm pulling it up here, excuse me, our 3-year average, so this would be 2018, 2019, and 2020 is 1.4%. So it's even gone down further, just to let you know.
Wow.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yep.
And just a couple of the comments, commissioners. If you look at 2014, 2016, 2017, I think that if I would have a few minutes, I could find very specific issues that caused, specific leaks at customers individual customers that we worked with those customers to fix those, repair those leaks that caused those, those blips, if you would, those increases in those 3 years. And as Dave said, that, that if you just take that average, and if you look at a percentage and a gallon per minute, it doesn't take much on a system this size to create that kind of an increase in percentage. And so I think that I think keeping it at 10% is a laudable goal. And yes, as Rebecca just indicated, our crew does a tremendous job in monitoring, the system and working with customers. The other is that you can install, Dave probably has some of these on some of his systems, you can install meters with sound detection that you can actually identify real-time leakage, in the system. But that's very expensive. And when you look at the record that we've been able to maintain, it simply would not be cost effective.
Commissioner Murphy, any comments, questions here?
Yeah, Steve, I don't know, you might want to answer this, or Dave. If I remember, when we purchased or took over Grandview area, the water line was a very low quality scheduled PVC pipe. Was that correct?
Well, there's still some of that, Commissioner. We have
Okay.
not replaced a lot of the original, and the leakages, the leaks that we have identified, like in the 2014, 16, 17, a couple of those were part of that original system, but we have not replaced the majority of the original system. And yes, for lack of better terms, there is a lot of real, overvalued and under qualified components of that system. And so when we extended the system across I-5 over to I-5 Industrial Park and added some extensions, a few years ago, of course, we put in high quality pipage. But long answer to your question, when we took the system on back in the early 90s, we bought a pig in the poke.
So Steve and Dave, I'm impressed with the low numbers, even what Rebecca said, even the 2.9, but 1.4 is just incredible. However, are we going to have to be looking at replacing some of that other lines? Because it sounds like most of your leaks have been found at the connections, am I right? And not in the main line? Or are you finding both?
No, the leakage that we've had were at the connection or near the connection. I think we had one a couple of years ago that was just in the main line, in one of the main lines. But we currently do not have a plan for replacement other than when we that we see that we're having a break or so.
Well, anyhow, it's impressive. So thank you to all the work that's going into this. It feels good to be able to report to the public, if it ever comes up, how well staff and Dave and Kurt, everyone has done in hitting 2.9, actually 1.4. Thank you.
Well,
That's
it's the other, we'll pass that on to our operators. I mean, these are the people in the field, our operators are really the ones that help us maintain that low leakage level. The other is that when we see that low of a quote loss of water revenue, what that really does is it helps all the customers at Grandview, helps us help them maintain those low rates. So
That's all I had.
I had a few questions. The first question I have is the rebuild of our water plant. What do we expect that impact that to have on this distribution leakage?
Our water plant one, Commissioner,
Yes.
it won't have any effect on this at all. Because the source of supply for the potable system at Grandview is the well at Grandview. The industrial system connection that we made, through to the fire hydrant system at Grandview, that's supplied by plant 2 and plant 1 in some ways, but anything that we do at our plant 1 or plant 2 industrial system really doesn't have much impact at all on this potable system. So
Okay. Regarding our numbers, having come from a background with energy and fuel, these numbers are actually quite high. Now, of course, there's a lot more externalities associated with leaking fuel or gas. So that's why those industries have much tougher targets. And this 10% target is a target that's set by the state, right? Not by us locally. And so we don't have a quote unquote a local target that we go after, but we're obviously exceeding it. And I'm assuming that our role here will be like somewhat akin to the kid who sits in the front of the class and does really good on all the tests and blows the curve for everybody else. So, to the extent that it's won't cause a problem for you, Steve, I plan to discuss our low leakage rate at our next state water summit, which is actually upcoming. That's a different spot on our agenda. Who's going to be attending the water workshop this year? We have to figure that out, but we'll talk about that later in the agenda. Anyway, I'll plan to point this out to people because it's certainly possible to get much lower numbers than what the state's goals are. Because if water truly is precious, then we should try to reduce these numbers. So that's all I have for comments, questions. Dave?
Sure, thank you. So 2 items to point out. One is we talked about how difficult it is to find a really small leak from your conversation. The other thing to recognize is, given that you're only producing 5 million gallons a year, 6 million gallons a year, which is really a very small amount of water for your potable only system, you can recognize that if you have one water main leak that runs over the weekend until it's identified by customers, you could quite easily lose 1 million gallons over a weekend with a water main break. And so you could lose 20% of your annual use in a single break. Probably not 1 million gallons, but many hundreds of thousands. And so you could see in one weekend for a water main break, you could completely blow what we traditionally look at as an annual use. So it's just a perspective. It's a relatively small drinking water system with the volume there. So I'll just go ahead and move on to the next section. And so now we're going to switch from the supply side between the well meter in this case and the customer meter to the demand side. And the demand side would be that water that travels through the customer meter. And we've just pointed out a couple of the typical things that you would all expect on water use efficiency, being plumbing fixtures, leaks on the customer side, as Steve mentioned, and leaks on the customer side would not be reflected in the prior table because that was demand supply side. And then seasonal demand. And so plumbing fixtures, certainly you can have toilets and faucets and things, but that is a very small component, and it's certainly worthy of discussing and encouraging through various programs, some of which you'll even see through the Whatcom Water Alliance in the coming years, where you can encourage more efficient fixtures. That definitely has a contribution, but given that it's a stable employee base, it's not likely to contribute to the change in the graph that I'm sure you're all looking at. Leaks on the customer side, Generally, you'll be able to identify those with spikes in water use, and that's part of your program component where you help customers identify that. And really the purpose of the graph is to show that seasonal demand is your biggest component. And it's important to note that in the last couple of years, the orange and the blue, you can see it's higher than the average, which is the dark red line there. And I just wanted to point out that this can be not necessarily for the traditional outdoor irrigation concept that we're all familiar with in Whatcom County. So sometimes you may have changes in process water, that particular commercial customer uses more water for their processing that may be seasonal, and therefore it may not be related to something that you could conserve on, just to keep that in perspective. And so I'm not directly aware of any process type water that's seasonal like this. The other one is commercial. And so you may have commercial seasonalities that are summer related. And a simple example would be somebody like WRS, who does a lot more outdoor activities during the summer months. They wash more equipment. Occasionally they will use some of their water for dust control. And so they could have, as an example, a significant impact on seasonal use. And there are some alternatives you may have for looking at that. And then certainly, while you don't have the residential component here, where you have outdoor irrigation that's common to other systems that are traditionally residential, you do have certainly have some outdoor watering in the Portal Way group. They definitely like green lawns in their areas in front of the buildings. And so in my opinion, from what I've learned about the system, is your spike is primarily related to the outdoor type washing component and those outdoor commercial uses that are seasonal, more in the summertime, and the irrigation components. And so we just want to point out that when we're looking at use efficiency, and you're looking at the graph here, we believe the latter two are more related. And so it's going to be a bit subjective when you look at water use efficiency communication to your customers. You have a different customer base, and so it's not the traditional. So I'm gonna stop here and let you folks discuss that, and then we'll just review the goals and program measures that we're recommending.
Say, Dave or Steve, did we not move one of our customers off of potable to industrial, which helped level this line out some?
Yes, Commissioner Murphy, yes, we did. And so I was going to comment on that too, that the seasonal use for one of our customers, our previous potable system customers, Healthy Pet, did vary because they were using a lot of potable water for their processing, and during the summer months, that could make a big difference in terms of ambient temperature. And so, of course, yes, we moved them to the industrial system, fire hydrant system supply this year. So we should see definitely a lowering, if you would, of that seasonal use by the, for manufacturing and industrial. The other is that Dave mentioned WRS. We have been talking to them about moving them to the industrial side also. It would be a lot less cost effective, if you would, to do that with them because of the quantity of water that they're using. But they do have a seasonal uptick or uptick in their seasonal use right now on the potable side. The other is that we do have a couple of customers, especially on over on the I-5 Grandview side, I-5 industrial side, that do like to water their landscaping. And so we've had some discussions with a couple of those customers and see about trying to reduce the amount of water for outdoor use. So the next couple of years, it'll be interesting to follow this seasonal trend. So.
So go ahead, Commissioner Grant.
Yeah, So Dave, I just had a quick question for you, with the, related to the outdoor use, one of the goals in the resolution is to reduce seasonal outdoor water use by 2 or 3% every 2 years, or a minimum of 1% per year. But so how are we going to measure that? Do we meter outdoor use separately?
Well, I believe since you're reading ahead, let's just jump there.
Well, before you do go ahead, I did want to ask a question on the slide. So, if we could, Commissioner Grant, come back to that issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that I'm seeing in this chart is not only that the mean use is higher, but the variance is much greater in the summer, and particularly, looking at the month of July. I'm curious, and I know we may not have this number, but I'm just curious if we have any idea of what this year's July usage was on this graph. Where would be the 2020 and 2021 dots be on this chart? Do we have any idea?
I do not have that data available for you.
Any guesses, Steve?
I don't have it in front of me, Commissioner. We certainly, I'll get it for you and get it back out to you. But I would assume, I just have to assume that based upon our industrial supply to our large irrigators, out west of Ferndale, that this year and last year, if you compare this year and last year to the previous 5 years, I'm just going to have to assume that that seasonal use, that July, June, July, and August, you're going to see a big spike in the last 2 years compared to the previous 5 years. But I don't have that in front of me, so.
And that also pertains to the subsequent discussion on setting targets, because clearly seasonal use is becoming more of an issue as a result year over year. So our targets have to be set in a way that actually are climate adjusted, perhaps. But with that comment, let's move on to Commissioner Grant's comment on the next slide, Dave.
Sure. And so both with what you were alluding to, and we're going to specifically jump into these goals, and you guys are right on target. And with what Steve said, obviously the second goal here we talked about is going to be somewhat subjective, because we do not meter individual outdoor use separately. And so this is going to be subjective. I'm going to project for you that with the, you're going to see, even with the warmer climate that we've had, when you take into account the change from Healthy Pet moving their non-potable water, and the trends that people are using as things tend to dry up, they change their irrigation habits over time when they recognize this type of climate change. I think you're going to see a flattening of the curve without those peaks in there, based on what you accomplished with Healthy Pet. And so I think you're going to be encouraged by what you see. That said, when you're setting water use efficiency goals, because you can't measure those things separately, and my note is there, this number 2, reduce seasonal outdoor use by 2 to 3% every 2 years, or a minimum of 1% a year. There's just a lot of flexibility in that. And again, recognizing these are goals, I think the reason they revisit these every 6 years rather than 10 years is that you're going to have 2020, 21, and 22 data to fit into, a periodic report from staff on how you're doing on this. And so I think this is a very reasonable goal, but it's going to be subjective for all the reasons that you've discussed this morning. In answer to Christine's question.
So are there comments from other commissioners, Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Murphy? Comments or questions? I have a comment, and that's that what are we doing as an organization to create an incentive for the reduced use of outdoor water. Okay, so it's okay to set a target for ourselves, but how can we work with our customers to incentivize reduced seasonal outdoor water use?
Commissioners, currently, as Dave just indicated, we don't require nor do we at this time offer separate meters for customers for outdoor use. So we don't have any way of metering that specific usage. And so if we want to look at establishing the process to offer separate meters and then try to incentivize that outdoor use reduction, we'd have to look at specific rate changes, which we have not done in the past. So but we can consider that moving forward. But
Steve, when we talk about the leaks at the connections, Dave, you might want to speak on this too. Is it on our side or their side of the meter? Because if it's on their side, and because the leaks have been fixed, they're already seeing savings. So I think by fixing the leaks, or being interested in fixing the leaks, aren't they contributing to incentive?
well, I think that like I said earlier, when we looked at those numbers for those 3 years, the peak in the leakage or the loss, if you would, I think 2 of those 3 were probably individual customer on the customer side leaks, and of course their cost of repairing those leaks, were on them, and so I think that the relationship between the leaks and the repair of those leaks and outdoor water use or reduction in water use, they're 2 separate things.
So Mike, I would just remind you that in this particular chart here, this is only those leaks that are between the well and the actual customer meter. So this would fall on the district's side of impact. And then when we switch to the second chart, this is on the customer side. And so that's when you're talking about incentives if they have a leak.
Okay.
You guys are very proactive with helping customers identify an unusual increase in their water use, which helps in the big picture. But again, as far as incentives, this is where the rubber meets the road as far as finances, and each utility has a different approach. And my take, having seen many, many systems, your quantity of water relative for outdoor use, with the exception of maybe WRS, even when you talk about irrigation, is such a small portion, generally speaking, for the majority of your customers. Most of them won't even notice a small blip leak. And I'm talking a small one, which are traditional. And most of them find that the cost of irrigating for a green lawn is such a small portion of their bill. I'll just give you an example. If somebody was paying $100 a month and they're going to pay $120 in the real world, they're not even going to think about having to give up a cup of coffee to pay their bill. And so it's a dynamic that's very difficult to fit in without punishing regular users that don't do outdoor uses and don't have outdoor leaks on their side of the meter. So it's a difficult challenge to do that compared to a residential system where everybody's water spikes by 50% in the summertime, and you know that it's related to outdoor water use. And so you can have a tiered system for water use, which would suggest that the average customer might use 1,000 gallons a month in the wintertime, and everybody goes to 2,000 gallons in the summertime, and you can equally apply that to the class of users. It's very difficult in a commercial setting to have policies that are not simply helping them with efficient fixtures or reminders or awareness. It's just a reality for your unique customer base. And so it's a difficult challenge regarding a tool's suggestion on how do you approach this. It's much more difficult for your type of customer class.
Currently, what these for these customers that we're referring to, how does our billing work, Steve? There's a fixed and a variable portion, correct?
Yes, yes.
And it's a different regime than the fixed and variable portion for industrial customers, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's the fixed and variable for Grandview potable is much like, you know, your municipal city residential connection. The industrial customers are all contract based. And so the fixed portion of the industrial is probably about 90+% of what their monthly bill is. And that is based almost entirely on the cost of the infrastructure, you know, our diversion, our treatment plants, our piping, pumps, and so forth, the capital cost that they share based upon their contract, you know, amount that they are basically purchasing. And the Grandview system is much like your single family residential connection in, you know, inside the city. So the fixed portion of the industrial customer potable system is a much, much smaller percentage of their total bill. It's mostly on the usage charge. It's just the opposite on the industrial side.
Thank you, and I'm smiling because you're probably reading my mind. And with that, I'll have a disclaimer, but the disclaimer will come after I say what I say. So one of the things that efficiency type of practices do is one of the ways one can incentivize efficiency is by having more of the bill be variable as a result of consumption, because then that allows the customer to self-regulate and to maybe notice more early as well that, oh my gosh, my consumption went up. Why did my consumption go up? Well, you know, what do we need to do to reduce this bill? Obviously, what you have to pay does impact your choices, and you know, and there's no question about that. So it's something for us thinking about going forward. I'm not sure it should be one of the bullets here, but it could be a bullet on here is to review pricing practices to incentivize, to potentially change the balance between fixed and variable portion of the customer's bill. Now, having said that, here comes a disclaimer. Having said that, one could easily make compelling arguments in a water system for more fixed costs too. So I don't want to suggest that it's the only wise thing to do is to increase the variable portion and reduce the fixed portion, but just a reasonable outcome of water use efficiency goals would be to look at that. And of course, weighed with all the other things that we weigh in terms of creating pricing and billing mechanisms for our customers. So I don't know, Dave, what do you think about adding that as something to as a recommendation to think about?
So there's two components here. The last slide, which we'll get to in a minute, is performance measures, which are going to be more in the flavor of what you're talking about. I will give you a observation from my 30 years having dealt with these rates and challenges and the mixes. And I will tell you that we traditionally approach this as the fixed cost, ensuring that regardless of how much water you use, that your overhead and your ongoing costs are always covered, because you could have a really low use year and you can't afford to do that. That's just from experience. With the variable rates for a traditional water system, not your water system at Grandview, it's very common to get very aggressive in order to encourage conservation with a tiered system. You know, the first 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 that you use, you get at what we call a living rate when we think of grandma at home that has a fixed income. It's very conscientious of that. And then as it increases, the people who want to water outdoor, if they're willing to pay that, or they're willing to be encouraged not to do it, there's an incentive there. But I will personally provide a strong opinion that it's very difficult to set that, because you may have healthy pet using 1,000 times more water than one commercial customer of yours that has one bathroom. And how do you give an incentive for the guy who uses one bathroom to use less water when healthy pet may be very, very efficient, but need the water for their commercial processes? And so because you don't have separate meters for all of this, it will be very challenging to do that. And so I would suggest that this would be part of your, in anticipation of your next year goal setting, to have these discussions, but that we would not likely, or I'm not suggesting that you would develop anything other than a plan to discuss this for the future as part of this next slide I'll show you. So that's a personal opinion, certainly not a recommendation.
Thank you. And by the way, in my comments, I wasn't referring to a change in metering, but I'm starting to see how, but in your comments and as well as in Steve's comments, that there is a little bit of a potential need for more information to do this fairly and appropriately.
Agreed.
Any other comments on this slide, commissioners? Let's move on, Dave.
All right. So for your last slide, there's two parts to your requirement here. One is water use efficiency goals, and the other one is water use efficiency program measures. And again, there's some very careful I's we're dotting and T's that we're crossing in the regulations here. And so the following describes the mandatory, which are inclusive here, and supplemental measures we're required to deal with at least one. Measures the PUD continues to or will implement in the Grandview Northgate system. And while this is a PUD overall drinking water water use efficiency program, I just emphasize the Grandview Northgate to remind you those are your drinking water customers. And so our recommended program measures are that for source and service metering and calibration, that you will continue to do what you're already doing, which is metering all of those, and that you would develop a program for meter calibration or replacement where calibration is not warranted. And I can tell you that that program is already under development based on the work that Dwayne described, where they're meeting with meter manufacturers and they're trying to establish a standard for the meters in the area that would fit into this program, where they would, as they replace meters, if necessary, or which ones they would calibrate. And so just as an outsider getting to speak with staff, they're already working on this effort. And so this is just a measure that you're putting in place. The second being leak detection and water accounting. Again, this is what you get an A for already. So I would recommend that you continue to follow the system leak detection and repair protocols that staff are already doing so well at. And this includes the process where if you get an unusual variation in a customer water consumption, that you reach out to them and help them from their perspective on their side of the meter, as Mike was talking about, help them recognize that there may be a leak there if it wasn't a spike in usage for some reason. And then the third one, which is customer education in lieu, and you'll notice I don't have changing the rate structure in here intentionally because of all the intricacies, that you would continue with conservation tips periodically in the customer bills. And this is encouraging water use efficiency fixtures and outdoor watering, and then develop an education outreach method or incentives, as you were discussing, to lower outdoor seasonal use. And so this is worded in the form of develop versus setting as a goal to say change rates, for example, as you were talking about, Commissioner Toole. This is just an encouragement to begin that development process. And I think this all fits within the intent of the water use efficiency goal and performance measures program, where you're teeing things up, whereas this hasn't been a particular component in the PUD's past. Even though you inherently do some of these things, this is teeing it up for the 6-year period on something that you will be working on. And so I think what you were talking about, Commissioner Tzmani, about evaluating rates, I think this would fall under the recommended customer education and the development 3B here, where you would look at that for possible future consideration when you look at rates or encouraged, outdoor metering, those types of things. And so these would be our recommended program measures of these two elements. And this is my last slide, other than discussing the requirement for the public comment portion before you actually adopt any resolution in matter.
So I agree with you on 3B, but before coming back to that, I'd like to hear from, do other commissioners have comments on this slide? Okay, so coming back to what you said there under 3B, I agree with you, Dave, and the reason I agree with you because the goal of this mechanism was, in my mind, was not to raise revenue or to certainly not make anything more difficult on customers, but basically support customers in a process of ongoing improvement. And in that regard, one of the things that would be helpful is to have the level of communication, and I assume we may already have it, but if not, I'm asking for this, the level of communication with our customers to develop almost like the flags that they would like us to keep track of on their behalf. I'm going to use a term, but I don't mean it in terms of the actual implementation, but like, for example, expert systems that, big utilities, much bigger than ours, have look for irregularities in consumption and are trained to pick up on certain patterns that are a flag for a problem. Now, we don't have to spend the money to develop some kind of an AI tool, but I do think that interviews and discussions with our customers where we could maintain flag, a kind of method for looking at and identifying flags in consumption that would be useful to our customers could be a helpful thing. But it really falls under this item 3, customer education. And because the goal here is not to generate more revenue, it's really about supporting the customer in something a goal that we both share, which is to use water more efficiently and effectively.
Let me encourage you by saying that in your water use efficiency program that is in your water system plan, and based on observations of the very proactive approach that the PUD has had with their customers, specifically to your comment, providing the customers with a comparison year over year of their water use is something that the PUD has done in the past and is very helpful in this proactive nature you're talking about. It's old school AI, I guess. And the other thing is, as you're looking at a meter technology and developing a program for meter calibration and replacement, your staff is already looking at what type of meter manufacturer are we going to recommend in your bidding process that will meet some of those requirements. And I'll give you a very simple example. Modern day meters will let you know if you've had unusual water patterns and unusual, for example, a residential customer, if the water runs for 24 hours without stopping, that would be very unusual for a residential customer. And so those types of things are already coming into play by the modernization of the industry. And so that fits again within 3B, and they're already part of your programs that are being developed. And so I just would encourage you that those items are already listed in your water use efficiency program, which you adopt inherently as part of your water system plan. And it's been a pleasure to work with the staff who are already thinking proactively without even having to engage in this specific element. And so I think that you're well on your way relative to the size and the nature of Grandview Northgate.
Are there any more comments on this slide from commissioners? Great, thank you, Dave.
None for me.
Please proceed, Dave.
So at this point, I'm going to wrap it up and turn it back over to Steve. And before I do that, I'm just going to jump back, bear with me, to the slide at the beginning regarding requirements. And so it is a specific requirement of the water use goals and performance measures that you folks today, or as appropriate by you and staff, that you would adopt goals and performance measures, likely as we recommended, but you have the authority to change those, and that it has to be done through a public process. And that public process has one key element where you allow customers to engage and comment before you adopt those goals. And that is outside of my scope in this meeting on how that's going to be handled. And so that would put us into this section, and I'm just going to exit not the meeting, but the process here. Steve, you're muted.
Sorry. Could you hold and could you go back to, before you exit, would you go back to the map of the Grandview system? That one. In talking about especially these last two comments on outdoor use and so forth, and metering and assisting customers dealing with excessive use and all that. I think Dave presented this slide at the last meeting, and we talked about adding some areas, potentially adding new customers, the two mobile home parks, one that Dave is circling there and the other one on the southwest corner. And as the potential to connect even to intra-Pacific Delta Park, a business park, and possibly doing some interties with other adjoining water associations. I think over the next 2 years that we may see some of that activity happening, connecting, taking over the two mobile home parks. I'm not saying we will, but the potential that our customer base, outdoor water use especially, could change significantly, and the opportunity to take on some of these, again, I'll call it underdeveloped infrastructure in some of these systems. We need to really gear up for addressing some of the issues that Dave and commissioners you have brought up in terms of working with customers, not only on outdoor water use, but leaks, leak efficiency and all that. So I think that again, with Dwayne and Devin and our water system crew, we over the next couple of years will be really looking at ways to improve our metering and our reporting back to customers on excessive use, leakage, and so forth. So
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I mean, I guess as a rule, we would naturally think that our involvement in serving more water would result in an improvement in the service and the water conservation. So from that perspective alone, it makes sense to be supportive of serving more folks, because in general, consolidation by PUDs across the state is something which is improving water use efficiency just in and of itself.
right. Yeah.
And I will point out that as the PUD, based on an observer, looks at potential service to a broader range of customers, whether that may be assisting other systems, remote management of systems. I know, being operations manager for a couple of the small water districts, it's invariably comes up, man, what if the commissioners don't want to do this anymore? And tongue in cheek, but serious, they would say, hey, let's just reach out to the PUD and have the PUD consolidate us, where they would be able to take over the system and operate them in a different manner, but the organization would continue. And so those types of long-term visions where the PUD's professional capacity will be able to support the community, there's no telling where the PUD will be called on to assist the community. And so all of these discussions, just to hopefully give you confidence, that's the framework that I operate in, not as an industrial type drinking water leader or planner. I have that other wheelhouse perspective where we're really on the ground with drinking water at all times. And so that's what this drinking water system plan is framed around, and the perspective that I'm coming at with, much like you've discussed here today.
So Dave, with you, what you just said, and Steve, what you just said, potential customers in the future, I didn't think that our Grandview well system was capable of taking on much more than what it already is taking on. Would it be part of our future strategic planning to talk about such things as putting, maybe using from plant 2 or 1 water from there going out to Grandview and putting in a potable water system that could handle large growth in the future?
The quick answer to that, Commissioner, is absolutely yes. And you know, part of our work, part of Dave's work, and part of the work of our water operations crew in moving in looking at the water system plan update, Dave early on identified the need to increase capacity of that potable system, storage, pumping, and so forth. And that's the main reason that we worked with Healthy Pet to get Healthy Pet on our industrial system rather than using the potable system, so that because they were using on average about 30 to 35% of daily average use of our potable system, and that amount was not sustainable. And so we worked with them to get them onto the industrial system. And as we look to potentially take on additional, like the mobile home parks or you know, some of the adjacent water associations, you know, we'll definitely be looking at what is the best way to accomplish that. Is that to try to increase the actual capacity of the existing potable system at Cherry or at Grandview, or should we look at you know, a potable treatment plant at Grandview to, you know, to use the industrial supply? So yeah, that's a long answer, Commissioner, but the answer is yes. We need to develop that long range capacity, best resource, you know, option. So.
And I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
I just would encourage you that based on your average use, although we don't know what type of new customer demand would come along, I just wanted to encourage you that based on the average use of your current industrial customers in the Grandview area, that we are confident that your current infrastructure will carry you out to 2036 and beyond. Not to say that, again, you couldn't have another Healthy Pet show up, which, you know, would be different, but with your conservation efforts and with the information available today, you have a reasonable planning period ahead to work through these issues. So I'm quite confident that you're in good shape for the current Grandview system.
Okay, but I still would like to throw that 2 cents out there, if we call it, regarding the droughts. I don't know what the future holds. People are losing water, drinking water for their homes. I don't know how many gallons that is, but if we could provide some kind of emergency backup to help these people when they do lose their water, I would sure like to be out at Grandview, because it is almost in the central of the area where people are losing water in their wells. It's a good location, but I don't know what that means. So I'd like to keep that on the table too with you guys.
The other, Commissioner, I appreciate that. The other area that we're seeing a concern by private well owners and very small Group B water associations is south and west of the city of Ferndale. And we certainly need to start we need to start getting serious about looking at options to serve the potable needs of several of those private wells and small water associations in that area. That would not be that source would definitely not be Grandview, but we need to start looking at options that could be most cost effective, getting grants and so forth to serve potable supply, possibly off of our industrial system out in that area.
My last question now is because Dave, you brought up that the public needs to has the opportunity now to talk about this resolution that we're going to be facing next. Are our customers and public aware that we are going to be facing a vote right now? Is it fair to take a vote on this resolution that's coming before us? If they're not aware of it, I don't know if we've given them the opportunity to speak.
I can speak to the not the PUD internal process. That's out of my wheelhouse, but from a regulatory process, there is a specific requirement where we notify through your public process about announcements of meetings, both on the DOH website, as well as informing the customers of this meeting and the discussions that we've had in the previous meeting about this upcoming event. And so from a regulatory standpoint, I'm confident that we have dotted the I's and crossed the T's in that specific matter. Mike, I will let certainly Steve speak to your own internal process.
Commissioner Murphy, yes, I mean, I don't know how else to answer that other than what Dave just said. And we followed the, notification process to all of our Grandview customers of this discussion today, and the opportunity for them to make comment if they chose to, and we have received no comments to this date. So we followed the required procedures to notification of our Grandview customers.
And my final comment to you, Mike, would be, and again, not knowing how the PUD is going to handle this today in the meeting, but there would simply be an opportunity for public comment or question during the water use efficiency forum is the official term, and that you would simply have those opportunity for those comments or questions by the public, obviously that would be attending this meeting today, since there was no written comments. And then at the conclusion of that feedback that you would receive as commissioners, you will have well achieved the requirements to then proceed to your formality of adopting the resolution as recommended or otherwise, would be my professional comment.
Thank you. I'm done.
And so to address Commissioner Murphy's point, we did have a public comment period at the beginning of this meeting. And that would have been the opportunity, Steve, for our customers who have all been individually contacted to provide any input on this resolution prior to our adoption.
You can, Commissioner, you can also at this time, if you so choose, you're not required to, but you can open this right now you can open this up for public comment before you consider the final resolution. But
yeah, I mean, it's not, we didn't do it explicitly in the agenda, but I'd feel more comfortable making one last request for public comment, because this is an item that does require a public forum. So using that discretion, I'm checking with any of our attendees if there's any further public comment relating to resolution number 798 on our water use efficiency goals. And I'm looking for a raised hand.
We don't have any additional public comment at this time.
Great, thank you, Ann. So with no further public comment, I'm ready to entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 798 on our water use efficiency goals.
I'll make that motion to approve Resolution 798.
Is there a second?
And I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Great. Well, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And the motion carries. Thank you, Dave, for all your work on this.
Thank you. It's a privilege. Just as a comment, I believe at the next meeting, you will have an opportunity for one minor housekeeping item, depending on how staff decides to handle that for a resolution. And then ideally, you will be able to adopt the water system plan because we will have dotted the i's and crossed the t's. And that would kick it into the queue of submittal to the various agencies. So we're well on track as staff sees fit.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
That completes item 6B. Let's move on to item 6C, the work order for Murray Smith for engineering services. Is that you, Brian?
That is me, Commissioner, and good morning.
Good morning.
I thought it might be useful to the commission to provide some context leading up to this work order. You know, given the magnitude of the work order, to give you some background on it. We had originally intended to have a workshop on the industrial water system, sometime last year. Obviously, the combination of COVID and other priorities prevented that. I have just a brief slide presentation, a few slides to walk you through to give you some historical background on the planning efforts that have been made to date regarding studies of the industrial water system and improvements that could be made to that system. So Ann's going to help me out here. She's the capable slide person. So Ann, could you show the first slide, please?
Is it not showing up?
There it is.
Yep.
I see it. Yeah.
I'm on multiple screens here, so I'm looking left and right. Yeah, okay, next slide, please. We'll move right through these. Over 10 years ago, the district commissioned the water system engineering firm Murray Smith and Associates to take a look at our industrial water system. And this was really the first engineering view or engineering study of the industrial system. The thinking at the time was, the facilities that comprise the industrial water system, the plant 1, plant 2, and the distribution mains out to Cherry Point were approaching 50 years old. And it was time to have a real serious look at the condition of the facilities, see how we were operating the industrial water system, discuss with our water operators, with staff here, what problems or issues they were dealing with at the time. And then after this thorough look, coming back to the district with a plan that included recommended capital improvement projects that could be made, the relative order of costs, and magnitude of cost of those improvements, and come up with a plan for how to start moving forward. And so this resulted in 2010, Murray Smith presented this, what they called the Water Supply Comprehensive Plan, but its sole focus was to take a look at the industrial water system and improvements that could be made to that system. Next slide, please, Ann. As a result of that, planning efforts and Murray Smith working with staff, they came back with a multitude of potential projects that could be implemented. We then worked through a process of trying to prioritize what to do first. But this just gives you, at that time, 2010, sort of the magnitude of what it would cost for groups of projects. And so, just going through the list, the top there, that's water treatment plant
number one, what was proposed was an extensive upgrade of that plant. And you can see the relative order of cost there. Next one was water treatment plant 2, and what, an upgrade to that plant, relative cost. The next was a group of distribution capital improvement projects that had added up to a large number, and basically it was adding parallel lines for the Alder Grove Road main and the Douglas Road main and the intertie. So it would be fairly extensive project and cost in that $44 million range. The next one down was surface storage. As you're aware, we have a just-in-time delivery system here. There's no storage on the industrial water system, absent the clear wells and the 2 water plants, but that's insignificant in terms of the total volume of water in those clear wells. So in total, we were looking at about $118 million in projects that could be implemented. Next slide, please. The result was the first thing that coming out of that plan that we took on was the total rebuild of water plant number 2. And the decision, in terms of the prioritization, it was felt that plant 2, even though it was a newer plant than plant 1, plant 2 was built in the 70s, plant 1 in the mid 60s, that get this one up to snuff first, and then take on the bigger task of upgrading water plant 1. So in 2012, we implemented this project, and the result was a campus of buildings for water treatment plant number 2. And just looking at the picture on your screen there, originally off to your right-hand side, you can see the white roofed building. That was the original control house. That control house contained our high head pumps and our basically our electrical infrastructure to run those pumps. We had the 4 basins, the settling basins right there adjacent to that plant. And that was it. That was our water plant number 2. So as a result of the project that we implemented back then, we refurbished the existing settling basins. We totally refurbished the control house, the white roof building, and basically we then built new facilities to support. Off to your left, we built 2 new longer settling basins. Sort of the middle picture there, we actually built a new building for the high head pumps and the electrical gear to run those pumps. And that building, we also had clear well installed there. Thanks, Ann. And then behind that building, we put in a new maintenance building for the crew. And then to the left of that maintenance building is a storage building. So we went to a true campus plan, and that's worked out well for us. Next slide, please. As far as the distribution projects that were recommended by Murray Smith, here's sort of a breakout of what they were.
Brian?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could I interrupt you? Could you go, Ann, could you go back to that previous slide? Do you want to talk at all? It's not directly part of the plant 2 expansion and remodel upgrade, but you want to talk a little bit about our acquisition of the substation?
Yes, along about this time, Puget Sound Energy used to own our substation that served the water plant. We negotiated a purchase of that substation, and then sort of in conjunction with the water plant upgrade, we reconfigured the substation on the distribution voltage side of the substation, splitting the bus up so we could have redundancy in electrical service and actually take part of the substation offline, still serve the water plants. And that was a big improvement of that substation. Puget Sound Energy, you can see there off to the right of the picture, those are Puget Sound Energy 115 kV lines coming into the substation. PSE also has 115 lines running south out of the substation as well. But for the most part, we own all the facilities within the substation and the yard itself. The other thing that this picture doesn't show is part of the water plant number 2 upgrade. We redid the sediment basins where, when we wash down the basically the settling basins, we then pump the washdown materials into the sediment ponds. And then periodically, as you're aware, we remove that sediment from those ponds. But those basins were reconfigured. We also added a second parallel water line from our intake facility to water plant number 2. That was the biggest project that the district had ever undertaken to that point.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. As far as the distribution improvement projects, we didn't proceed with the parallel mains or a parallel line on the intertie, but we did install isolation valves on both Douglas and Alder Grove roads. We're also planning to do additional isolation valves in the future. And currently we are in the process of the upgrade to the D station facility that serves the BP refinery. So that project's underway. We did look at cathodic protection and doing an upgrade there, including putting in an anode well as part of that. But based on other projects where we exposed our distribution mains, we determined that the pipe is in really relatively good shape and that it wasn't necessary to upgrade the cathodic protection at this time, and wait until in the future, if we were to add additional lines out there to serve Cherry Point, we put the new cathodic protection in at that time. So that just gives you a feel for some of the things that we've done since that original Murray Smith Associates plan. Next slide, please.
Brian, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Could you explain again what cathodic protection is?
Well, cathodic protection, in the case of our line, our mains, they basically are cylindrical pipe, with cement lined, but they are metal pipe. And we also have metal bands, reinforcing bands around the outside of the pipe. And there's metal at the connections where we put the pipes together. So, basically, over time, you've got a buried pipe, you've got metal that's basically attacked, as a cathodic process. I'm more familiar with boats, but you'll have a deterioration of the metal because of stray electrical currents that are created and are basically at a molecular level attacking the metal, and that metal will deteriorate. So cathodic protection, you're actually putting in these small, what do we want to call them? Small sacrificial, whatever, but you're putting in small wires attached along those pipes that they then go to an anode, which is a sacrificial piece of metal, if you will, sunk in the ground, and that will basically the stray electric currents carried over that wire to that anode, and the anode is basically the sacrificial lamb, if you will. It's eaten up instead of the metal on the pipe. In boating, we put zinc anodes, if you will, at different points in a boat to attract those stray currents and prevent your breakdown of metal in your engine and other metal parts in the boat. So that project is sitting out there. We may do it in the future if we add additional line, or if we get an indication that the pipe is deteriorating. So moving from the 2010 plan, it had been about 10 years since Murray Smith did their plan, and we thought, well, it's really time to take another look. We've implemented some of the projects that Murray Smith proposed, and conditions have changed on the system, both in the way we operate the system and the fact that instead of seeing a trend where water consumption by the customers is on the increase, it's actually trending down. So, given those various factors, we thought, let's take another look and maybe reprioritize what we otherwise thought we might have done. And so we, picked the most cost-effective things to do next that made the most sense. So we commissioned RH2 to take this next look at our industrial water system, look at the work Murray Smith and Associates had done, look at what we've done since that 2010 plan, look at the change in our customer usage, and then working with staff, come up with a set of recommendations for what measures still made sense and how to move forward on that. Next slide, please. So, like Murray Smith and Associates, RH2, after looking at all the previous data, going out and doing their own field surveys and talking to staff and what our priorities were, came back with another, I'll call it a large set of potential projects that we could do to improve the industrial water system. And here again, it's a similar grouping. The one thing that was added in the RH2 planning efforts that we didn't address in Murray Smith's earlier planning effort was the electrical system. And so the item you see here, the $2 million, was primarily looking at adding standby power to serve the water plants. So here again, in total, you got a large number, $123 million in projects. When we worked with RH2, we directed them that, one of the driving factors here was, for us, was not as much increasing overall capacity of the system to deliver more water to Cherry Point, because what we were seeing was trends down, but to look at reliability, as one of the chief criteria for prioritizing. And the other was that we kind of settled on, we wanted to have each water treatment plant capable of treating and pushing out of that treatment plant up to 21 million gallons a day of water. And that number was just derived at, it's currently about the aggregate operating demand under contract with our customers at Cherry Point. So we picked that number rather than the maximum amount of water that customers could request under the contract, which is their contract maximum demand, if you will. So the numbers you see here for water treatment plant 1 and 2 basically are to achieve that 21 million gallons a day out of each plant. That way, if we ever got to that point and we had to, take one plant offline for a significant amount of time, we can carry all the customer demands with the other plant. Caveat being, the plants would now have a capability of 21 MGD, but the distribution system wouldn't. So it's just planning for the future, but the main focus was on reliability of service. And so we quickly, settled on water treatment plant being the oldest plant. It needed the most work. It was the key component in terms of overall reliability of our industrial water system. Next slide, please. So one thing that RH2 at our request didn't do in their plan was to prioritize. We hadn't settled on just exactly what we would like to do. And so we said, prepare your plan and we'll prioritize and come back and do some work later. Here again, intending that we were going to have a workshop with the commission and kind of sort through the priorities and everything. But that didn't happen in 2020. 2021, we decided, well, it's time to take a look at what RH2 did, take a fresh look again, and do that prioritization. So we retained the services of Murray Smith, MS, which is the former Murray Smith and Associates. It's a branding thing. They just changed their name. It's the same company. And asked them to help us with that prioritization. And as a result of that work that Murray Smith did, we settled on the first priority is a phased total rebuild of water plant number 1. And, in working with Murray Smith, we talked about 3 phases, and you can see them there and the relative cost of each phase. All 3 phases, you're looking at a total cost of about $37 million. But those 3 phases aren't set in granite. I mean, we've had recent discussions. It very well may be that phase 2 and 3 would be combined for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in a minute. But here again, focus water treatment plant number 1 as being the next big project for us to take on. Next slide, please, Ann. Let's see. Can you go to the last slide? Is there one on? Yeah, that's right. Back up. No, they're out of order. I'm sorry. Go to the next. So we'll do this slide last. There we go. Just talking about water treatment plant real here quickly. When we're talking about a phase rebuild of water plant number 1, the first phase we're talking about, and I'm pointing my finger, which you can't see, but our facility right there on the river's edge, that's the intake facility where we draw water out of the river. The first phase would be to redo the piping between the intake and our treatment facility to increase capacity to pull water from the intake into the treatment facility. And part of that phasing, we were talking about actually building a utilidor. So we've got piping that we can actually go underground and access, because currently all that piping between the intake and the treatment facility is buried. So any work we do on that piping, we have to actually close and dig up Ferndale Road, which is a big deal. So we're hoping that if we could get a utilidor in there, then we can do some work without disrupting flow of traffic on Ferndale Road. One of the reasons we want to do this intake facility first is we want to get ahead of the work that the city of Ferndale is doing with the Corps of Engineers, because they have a future project where they're going to be improving the levee to the north, upriver, but adjacent to our intake facility. And we would like to have that first phase done before they start their work.
Brian,
Yes.
and do you want to speak at all about the rebuild of that substation at Plant 1 and its relationship to the rebuild of the plant, or at least a sequencing in terms of timing to get that done?
Yes. You can't see it in the photo, but just kind of walking, starting from the intake facility, and you head to the west. There's our treatment facilities in the middle there. And then we've got the basically the settling basins behind the treatment facility. And then back behind there, the long football field, it looks like, those are our sediment basins. We have two sediment basins behind the settling ponds. This, behind the settling basins, we have the sediment ponds. We are currently starting to construct behind the sediment ponds a new substation. The reason for the substation, basically, I mean, just up, date electrical capacity, but the original substation, which is to the left, you can't, it's hard to see, but to the left of the control and the treatment facilities is original. It was built in 65. It was built by Puget Sound Energy or Puget Sound Power Light at the time to serve our water plant. As you're aware, we bought that substation some years ago, but it's played out. It's an old substation. It only has one transformer. So if the transformer fails, we lose water plant number one. So we felt, here again for reliability, we needed the new substation. That new substation will have duplicity in the sense that it's going to have, just like our substation here at Plant 2, it will have two transformers, two buses, so we can maintain electrical service under a variety of conditions. We've started that substation first. It's the sort of the first part ahead of the water treatment plant number one upgrade, because while we're doing the upgrade, we have to maintain service to the water plant. So the intent is to build new facilities while the existing water plant is running. We can't take water plant number one offline for any significant amount of time until the new facilities are in place and we're ready to cut over. The other thing we're doing with the new substation is we'll serve the existing water plant at its existing voltage. But with the new facilities, we're putting in new high heads. They'll be 4160 volt high heads. So we'll have to serve, when we cut over, we're going to have to serve the new facilities at a different voltage. So you're going to have a period there where we've got two voltages, one out of each bank of the substation, one serving the old, one serving the new. Is that adequate, Steve? Do you think?
Yes, yeah.
It's, I guess
Hey, Brian.
the sense I want to give you is a very complex project.
Brian,
Yes.
on the electrical there, or Steve, why couldn't we design that? Because you're going to do a complete rebuild to potentially serve other customers maybe in that area besides just our needs. Is that being considered?
That Commissioner, that's a good point. And yes, it is being considered. We've had discussions, particularly with the city of Ferndale, who has their water treatment facilities right next door. And we have somewhat oversized the capacity of our transformers for the new substation, thinking that they may elect to take service from us in the future. That's a decision they'd have to make. But we could then drop a pad mount transformer that would be fed by our substation and feed their plant.
Okay. And why you have that picture, because it's a good picture, where we're removing water from the Nooksack to go from 11 million to 21 million. Did I read that the screens have to be enlarged or more screens put there to? I thought I read screen improvement.
We have looked at screen improvements for other reasons like sediment buildup and so yeah, you're right. We have looked at screens, but we're basically, with the rebuild of the intake facilities several years ago, we have the full capability now of drawing our water rights, full water rights out of the river. We just don't have the capability to move it all the way through the system.
Both of you, I have concerns about us drawing more water out of the Nooksack. Is there any way that we could not be creating some kind of storage or something, or having something differently so we don't put so much impact on the Nooksack, especially during these drought times, that we could siphon off of some other storage besides using the Nooksack as our only source of water storage? Has any thought gone into that?
The only discussion that we've been having in that regard is working with Birch Bay Water and Sewer District, possibly the city of Blaine, and a couple of the watershed improvement districts in this, I'll call it the northwest corner of the county, and looking at other potential sources of water supply, mainly from, the new deep aquifer wells that Birch Bay and Water Sewer District and the city of Blaine have recently drilled. But that would mostly provide an opportunity to supplant some of the water supply to Cherry Point. But in terms of looking at alternative sources for the large users at Cherry Point, we haven't seen any other or looked at any other opportunities other than off-stream storage, but off-stream storage would only be called upon when the extreme low levels in the river would be experienced. So I think that's a long answer, Commissioner, but in terms of actual other supply sources for the large industrial customers, no, we haven't really looked at any alternatives. The other is that, and I know that that's not really the answer to your question, but as we've talked about before, even at the low flows that we've experienced in the last couple of years, last year being, I think, the lowest ever recorded on a single day for the time that that the river gauges have been in place, some 52 years. Last year, we experienced one day, I think it was 480 CFS or approximately that at the Ferndale gauge. Even that day, I think that day we were taking about 12.5 to 13 million gallons on that day. That was, less than about 6% of the flow. So the impact of our take at that location on the main stem, I don't want to minimize the potential impact, on low flows on fish and habitat, but our percentage of that take is extremely small. So.
Well, okay, I just don't know if we're sending the right message to our community that we're good stewards of the Nooksack. I do have concerns that we may send the wrong message by doubling our capability of withdrawing. I mean, going from 11 to 21 million gallons a day. I don't know what kind of message that's sending out to the community.
Well, I think the message that we need to continue to send out to the community, and I think that message has, bears a reflection of what the PUD has done in the past 20 some years, and hopefully will continue to do, is work with other purveyors, other needs in terms of the tribes and the needs for fish and in-stream, as well as working with our agriculture, our farmers in the community, to manage the system that it's not looking at a single source reduction at a single location, as it is how can we be a partner in working with all the other purveyors, all the other needs, all the other users in the community, to figure out how we can best manage the supply here. I just lost my screen. I'm sorry.
We can still see you.
Okay. All right. There
So
we go.
Okay.
I guess I get a timeout here. But anyway, I think that's the message that we need to continue to send, is that it's not how do we reduce, the amount of water that we're taking out of the river. It's how we manage, along with other consumers, other needs in the community to manage the entire system, looking at ways to, move water around, working, like I said, like as an example, Birch Bay Water and Sewer District and Blaine and a couple of the watershed improvement districts to see how we can use, each other's resource and find ways to meet stream flow needs as well as out of stream users. So I know that's not probably the answer that you're looking for, but I also think that it's not a matter of us doubling, the water that we're going to take. It's about how we can best manage the amount of water that we take. And I think that building storage, whether it's off-stream storage, pre-treatment, is one way to, quote, manage, those flows better. And in terms of our Cherry Point customers especially, and our irrigation customers west and southwest of Ferndale, where right now we're seeing the most irrigation customer need, is to build post-treatment storage so that if we have to, we can, draw less water at that one day of the extreme low flow and still meet, all of our customer needs. So.
Okay, I just don't know if it makes sense for me to even say that even though the demand may be 21 million per day, during these times, drought times, we draw 11 or 12 million gallons a day, but somehow have some kind of a system or storage set up. I don't know if that's even possible. I'm just throwing out there so we do not impact the Nooksack, even though we have water rights. I just want to make sure that we're good stewards of that area.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And that's how we manage our resource, how we manage our take, how we work with other purveyors, agriculture, other cities, tribes. That's constantly, as you know, that's constantly what we do. So.
In this study that you're doing, it says that you're going to do design, permitting, bidding, and the whole works. Are you taking much time into looking at climate issues, climate concerns? Are we experiencing in the last 2 years what we've experienced for the last few years? Is that going to be the way things are going to be now? Are we going to see the river becoming lower and more wells becoming drier? Are you taking into consideration any of this in your design and build and what is really needed?
We have, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to say, yes, Commissioner, we are keeping that in mind. And it isn't the flows that are the concern, it's the flashy river. I mean, we're having more issues with turbidity than we've had in the past. And that's a challenge. And that is part of the design, in terms of our dosing systems and stuff for treating the water and et cetera. But yeah, that is a consideration, but it hits us primarily on, those extreme events where we're getting, either an extreme event where we've got frazzle ice or where we have a sudden rapid spike in turbidity. I think that provides most challenges to the water operators.
And I agree. I should have said that you're getting challenges at both ends. So, and you have to deal with it daily, monthly, yearly. So I agree. And I'm happy to hear that you're looking into all this and considering that in the design and build for the future. So good. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No. Ann, could you put that one slide up, the Murray Smith work order 2? Okay, Al, this is a long-winded way of getting to the work order number 2, but Commissioner Murphy brought it up. This work order, which has a fairly big price tag, $1.8 million, but it's not just looking at phase 1 of the project. Within work order 2, Murray Smith will be doing preliminary engineering design on the entire project. the entire campus of facilities needed for the rebuild of the plant. And one of their first tasks is they're going to come back to staff with 3 different campus plant designs. Because if you think about a water treatment plant, there's piping running between the different facilities. So we've got limited space in the property out there. We've got to get the campus plan right. So we start dropping facilities. We've got room for those facilities and also room for the piping that interconnects the facilities. So the campus plan has to be settled on first. That drives the engineering design of the entire plan, of the engineering design of the entire plant. So they'll be doing that for the entire project. They're going to be providing us permitting assistance. They're also retaining several sub-consultants that, as you can imagine, on project this complex, there are a number of consultants. We already know who they are because Murray Smith did a real good job saying, hey, we're considering using so-and-so. What do you think? Is that okay? And, you know, for example, they're using PSE for surveying and mapping of the new plant. And they've got geotech folks on board. They've got a civil architect. It's a team effort on this one. So they'll be in charge of their sub-consultants. They're then going to prepare a final engineering design for the phase 1 of the project we just talked about earlier. And that is the piping under Ferndale Road. Following the acceptance of the final engineering design, they are going to prepare their portion of the bid documents, the specifications for equipment, etc. And they will assist district staff with the bidding process. And then another thing we did this time around that we haven't necessarily done on previous projects is we said, okay, Murray Smith, give us just, you know, a bundle of hours that may or may not be needed, engineering hours, that if we run into something unexpected, you've got some hours there to work with. But bearing in mind, they're only going to bill us for actual hours consumed. But so we've got this category in this work order that's just that. Use of needed hours. And I think that's it leading into work order number 2. But we feel that it's necessary to move forward at this time because we're trying to get ahead of the city on their levee project, and also water plant number 1 needs to be replaced. It's the major issue in terms of reliability on our industrial water system.
Say, Brian?
Commissioner Murphy, yeah.
Yeah, you talked about the plans that Murray Smith is going to bring to you. Was his name Tom that ran it last time for Murray Smith?
His name is Tom Perry, yes.
Is he going to be running it again?
He's not running it. He is still an engineering consultant, and he will be providing input, yes, because of his previous experience with water treatment plant number 2. But we have another engineer out of a different office who is actually going to be running the project. And I should mention with Murray Smith, their local office is Everett, but they have offices all, you know, as things are these days. You got virtual offices, you got people scattered. They're in Portland, they're in Bend, Oregon. They have a small office, Montana. So they have a full engineering team to assist us.
Can I ask or make a request? I didn't hear you say it, except that you said that Murray Smith was going to bring, I think, 3 options. My concern is I've worked with engineers and architects, and in the end, they told us how we were going to live and what we're going to work with, and staff did not have the opportunity to say, this is what we need to function and do our jobs. Our staff and crew going to have the option to be able to help in the layout of what they need?
Yeah, this is something we really stressed, Commissioner, and you'll see if you look at the detail of the work order, their scope of services. It was a lesson learned from water treatment plant number 2 that I don't think the engineering firms or even the contractors at that time realized how hands-on district staff are and how important it is to get district staff input on what their plan for facilities are and what their plan for operations is. And so we have built into this work order at various stages a number of workshops where Murray Smith and district staff will get together and discuss. You know, Murray Smith will come forward, here's what we're proposing, what do you think? We have an opportunity to say, no, you know, if you change it here, that would make us happier. So we clearly have that ability to input and guide the decision making. And that was one of the reasons for getting the 3 campus plans. We wanted to get that piece right because that drives everything else. And there are periods all along that process where we have opportunity to input.
Commissioner Murphy, the other thing that we learned, and I think Brian sort of touched on it, but that in the reconstruction and rebuild of Plant 2, which will be, the issue will be mirrored in rebuilding of Plant 1, is that we have to keep that, Brian mentioned it earlier, we have to keep Plant 1 operating fully before we literally move over to the remodeled version. And it is so critical for the engineering firm that's working on the design to work with our water operators and Dwayne and Brian consistently and constantly to make sure that how that operation, you know, of that plant continues as we actually make modifications and some remodeling in the existing facility, as well as building new. So that crossover and that communication and that constant dialogue is so critical in this case. It's not like someone, a city building a brand new water treatment plant, and without worrying about that, just literally open the valve one day to the new plant from the old plant. So
yeah, it's we're faced with a situation, given water demands, even though they are trending down, that we don't have the luxury to take Plant 1 offline for several weeks while we do cutover. It's literally hours, depending on the time of year. We can't have Plant 1 down for less than a day. So.
And I understand that, and that made me think about such things as when I read the building structure of the first floor we built to handle floods, but it says that the second floor will have interior light framed walls. I don't know if they're meaning metal studs or what, but with the possibility that this area could have an earthquake, I guess they say when instead of if. Light framed, I don't know if that's the best idea for this building. I think this thing should be bulletproof from the foundation up. And I didn't see anything in it about solar or turbines or anything along that line either. So there was a lot of questions I had.
No, that comes, that's once you get into the design process is where all that comes up. And we're not there. This is just the scope of services to get us to that point, Commissioner. And that, first time that comes up, you get into the preliminary, conceptual and preliminary design process. You start having those discussions, what you want to see, do you want solar panels? Do you want, the exposure for the roofs, et cetera. And so, yeah, there's an opportunity to bring that stuff in. There's nothing set and granted in terms of the design at this point, but clearly, given that we're, just outside the shoreline, we're in, potential floodplain, and geotech will weigh in heavily on this one in terms of the foundations and the other structures. So
I think Commissioner Murphy also, your question earlier about potential service to others around our new substation on the energy side. we, we wanted to make sure that when we design the new substation, that we would be prepared to, connect solar systems, connect, all, those kind of components into the rebuild of the plant. So we wouldn't create, quote, a barrier or, a significant cost impact of making those decisions as we went into the design, of the plant itself. So.
Okay,
And the other thing that plays in on this one is the state and federal legislation. There may be an opportunity to get supplemental funding for some of these measures. If we want to integrate solar into the plant or whatever, we may be able to seek additional funding.
We even looked at the potential of adding charging stations, connected to our system. So we looked at that when we looked at the design of the substation. So we're trying to keep all those little dots on the screen here so that we don't eliminate the, the potential.
So quick comment from me, and it relates to that comment that you just made, Steve, about charging stations. And, when we were doing our strategic initiatives with Jim, we talked a little bit about the retail touch of the PUD, and that we don't have much retail touch. And so I would just love in these campus plans, if we could think a little bit about how we might make this facility a place that the community could engage with in some way. Dwayne took me out to the water treatment plant 1 back in December, and it very clearly needs to be upgraded. That was apparent to me just from walking through. But, just thinking, could it be public charging stations? Could it, there's a long history of art being connected to public works projects. Could we do some sort of a competition with local artists or youth to make this space more beautiful? So would just love to kind of inject some creativity into the campus plans to think about how, I think most people drive by there and they have no idea what the plant even does, or the fact that it's their public utility that's running it. So just a comment, and would love to kind of see where that might go with the campus plans.
Well, and thank you. And the other is that we've had some communication with the city of Ferndale, albeit limited so far, but as we move into, a much more in-depth look at that campus, quote, campus plan, and some of the things that you just brought up, Commissioner Grant, and that is even the potential of having public charging stations adjacent to the city park, adjacent to the Pioneer Park. I mean, those are the kind of things that we want to continue to look at, so.
Okay, great.
Any other questions, commissioners?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you. Commissioner Murphy? Okay, so thank you for the presentation. And I think what we have before us now is approve a work order.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make a motion to approve work order number 2 with Murray Smith.
And I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 The motion carries. And I think
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
I think you're handling 6D as well, Brian?
That is correct. We're moving from water molecules to electrons. What staff is asking for on this one is approval for the supply and delivery of the 115 kV electrical substation equipment, metal clad switchgear. And as the commission must recall, back July 27th, we presented the purchase of the switchgear to the commission, but we recommended rejecting all bids at that time as being non-responsive. And so the commission agreed and approved the rejection of all bids. The commission further approved a resolution giving staff the ability to negotiate directly with switchgear manufacturers and not use the traditional competitive bid process. And that was resolution, what was that, 9? Well, I don't have it here, but that resolution passed. And so we operated after that commission meeting on the 27th. We went out and talked to several switchgear manufacturers and settled on, after discussions, the company, which is Powell Electrical Systems, Inc., gave us a proposal that met our needs, both in terms of equipment specification and ability to deliver the switchgear within the time frame we needed. Because as you're aware, the refinery substation project, the critical element is timeline. We need to meet our timeline to assist the refinery. So with that, we're recommending approval of the proposal by Powell Electric Systems, Inc. for the price of $1,643,947 without tax, with one caveat, which is addressed in the memo, that Powell met all our conditions except for the delivery cost of the switchgear. Because of the supply chain disruptions, they're having issues like we've seen from past purchases. They weren't willing to guarantee the delivery price, which is part of that $1.6 million. And so we agreed with them that if needed, based on evidence they provided, they could bump up that delivery price, which, if that came to fruition, would increase the overall cost by about $14,000. So we're asking for approval of, at the price as bid, with approval for the district's manager to execute a change order if needed to address the delivery cost portion of their bid.
And Brian, you said that change order is 13,000, you're estimating?
It's $14,600. Yeah, I wanted to stress it's not a percentage increase of the overall cost. It's just for the delivery portion.
And Commissioner Murphy and Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Drishmani, I mean, under the delegation of authority that you have provided to the general manager, I could approve that change order if it would occur, but we wanted to identify it up front as a potential cost. And if it does come about, then we wouldn't have to take separate action on it. And we just wanted to identify it for you to make sure that you recognize that that possibility exists.
I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioner Drishmani, you're muted.
Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Murphy?
No questions from me.
I really don't have any questions. I know in today's world, we talk about trillions of dollars, but I still get a little excited over 1.6, 1.7. I have to get used to the larger numbers, but I will make a motion to approve the purchase of a metal-clad.
Commissioner Murphy, I do have one question / concern. And that is that we are taking a non-standard action with this particular procurement. And John, our legal counsel's not on right now. But I do want to ask that because it's non-standard, there may be special contract requirements with this kind of a direct purchase that I'm certainly not aware of, and I'd like to ask about that. And then whenever we make these approvals, there's always pending legal review. So I recognize that. So I'm not asking for any change in the motion. I'm just asking that we do get follow-up regarding the contractual and legal requirements around a direct purchase of this that doesn't go through our standard process.
Commissioner Deshmani, John is on the phone, so and maybe John wants to comment, but we've worked with John and other folks in his office throughout this whole process. So maybe John would just like to.
Certainly. Yeah, Commissioners, I have been here by phone and have been listening. This time we have our wireless system down at our office, so I'm not able to log in via Zoom. This is a special market condition. We've reviewed this previously in this regard. The motion actually has pending final staff engineering and legal review, as I understand, but we have been through this. The marketing conditions exist based upon the bidders conditioning their bids, enabling exceedance of the bid price. So no firm bids were recovered. That's why we can go through this special bid market conditions, in our view.
Yeah, and then my question, John, is that in entering into contract with this particular vendor, are there any potential hiccups or hangups in the process that you currently foresee? And if there is, obviously, come back to the commission. I recognize that.
Yeah, I don't see that. You can pass the motion as presented. We can do a second review with the staff if you'd like, but we haven't seen that thus far.
Okay, that's basically what I was asking about. Great. So I have no further issues.
And I am on mute, but I am here.
Okay. Sorry, Commissioner Murphy, I interrupted you.
No, it was a good question, so thank you, O'Toole. You want me to make the motion again? You ready?
Please.
I will make a motion to approve the purchase, supply and delivery of a 115 kV electric substation equipment, metal clad switch gear, authorizing the general manager to execute the purchase and, if necessary, change order.
Is there a second?
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And the motion carries. So that completes our new business. And next, can we go to the general manager report?
Commissioners, I only have just a couple of items, and they both relate to your next meeting on September 14th. One is that I will be requesting you consider an executive session to discuss the potential adjudication of water rights in the basin. And the second is that this will be based upon our budget schedule for adopting the 2022 operating and capital budget. This will be an opportunity for you as commissioners to give us some additional direction as a follow-up to the initiatives and discussion that you've had on strategic plan, but give staff additional direction if you so choose on any items that you want us to specifically consider in the development of the budget. We're looking at second meeting in October to bring to you the first draft of that 2022 budget. So, and I said two, but one further is that I will be making a presentation to you on the 14th regarding the California Creek Grant project. As of last week, I finalized what my thoughts will be on advising or recommending to you to advise Department of Ecology that we will not accept the California Creek grant. I've been working extensively over the last couple of months with Ecology and a couple of the other water purveyors in this corner of the county, trying to assemble a different approach to utilization of those funds. and getting some changes in language of the contract or agreement with Ecology on the grant. And as of last Thursday, I got a response back from Ecology saying, if you want those changes, you're going to have to turn the grant back in and apply for a new grant under the next grant round. So bottom line is, my recommendation will be for us to not accept the grant at this time. So I'll have that on and I'll prepare a memo to you prior to the 14th. So that's all I had, Commissioner.
Thank you, Steve. Commissioners, Commissioner Murphy, Commissioner Grant. Should we move on to commissioner reports, or is there any questions for Steve? Okay, let's go to commissioner reports. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Commissioner Murphy.
I don't have any per diem requests, so I don't have anything there to report. However, I'm still busy working with people on lack of water in their wells and things. And Steve, I don't know if I address this to you, or I would sure like to see, there doesn't seem to be a place where people can go to get information. And I was hoping the PUD website could. I mean, droughts, emergencies. I have no water in my well. What do I do? Surprised how many people do not know where to go, how to get water. What do they do? What's the process? I was hoping with our staff, maybe Dave could join in to come up with something to guide people who are going through this very difficult time, to say, hey, I go right here, I got information, maybe even places that could provide them water so they can get back up and running as quickly. But I'm being told that the support out there is just about zero, and people are struggling on their own. And I would hope that we as a PUD could come alongside and do something. So if we could put something on our website to guide people. The other thing that people are still talking about, and Christine, maybe you can talk on, is I'm still getting questions about what are we doing in the county broad. And I tell people about the interlocal agreement, NOAA being part of that.
Yeah.
But people want a little bit more information. And if you could give me anything more to tell them, I know you have a meeting coming up, so you'll probably have a lot more. Maybe you could get that word to Steve. Steve could get it to Altu and I. Just something more that I could tell our community what's going on. I'd appreciate it. That's all I had.
Should I go next? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, the only per diem request that I did, was the broadband steering committee meeting on the 11th, and then we have another one tomorrow. And so Mike, kind of two key themes that we're focused on with the broadband steering committee meeting are, really relate to the last mile infrastructure and beginning kind of feasibility potentially around forming a public ISP. So, the formation of a kind of public broadband option. I know that doesn't give immediate relief to folks, but, we understand that there's tremendous urgency. We also, and I think Steve will be forwarding our steering committee meeting notes, but we want to put a press release out, and Commissioner Shepherd and I, with the group, came up with some priorities for what the group is focused on. And rapid deployment is our top priority. And for the work that we're doing, making sure that we have an open access system that creates competition is another key priority. Affordability, and then kind of future proofing the system, which basically means fiber, building fiber is another priority. So we, Mike Hogan, who's the communications in for the port, is working on a press release that will kind of encapsulate a little bit more of what we're hoping to do. And then something that I think we'll be talking about at the meeting tomorrow, or potentially, yes, it is on the agenda for tomorrow, is a joint PUD port meeting sometime later in the fall to have a little bit, to have staff present a more detailed plan of what we would be kind of doing going forward. So that is not confirmed yet, but I think that it would be helpful to have, you know, a deadline where we say we're having this joint meeting, and we want to kind of, we'll never, I think we always need to be iterating, but, you know, kind of our best thinking presented to both commissions together, since we never did have a meeting with all 6 commissioners. So, you know, that's where we're at right now. And we absolutely understand that, that moving as quickly as possible is the top priority. And that's in our priorities right now. So that's all I have right now. And the other thing I wanted to say with my commission report is just that I've been, you know, working hard to try to contact people within my network to let them know about the general manager posting. You know, I say that if people have any other, you know, additional questions about the application process, they need to go through Prothman. But considering how challenging the hiring environment is right now, I think that the personal touch of getting a call from a commissioner does make an impact. So just wanted to share that I'm doing that, and hopefully it will translate into some decent application numbers. So that's all from me right now.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, and a press release sounds like a great idea, and maybe the press release would also be the kind of thing, or maybe a separate communication to invite the public to show up and be involved in the joint PUD port meeting. In the past, we've done meetings where we haven't had public
That's a
comment.
great idea.
It might be a good idea to and encourage public comment at that joint meeting, so all 6 commissioners can hear it. Okay, so there's I have no per diems, but I do have 2 meetings. One was the Watershed Management Board, and perhaps Steve, you can help me a little bit on this, but what was adopted was an update to the salmon enhancement program. And maybe if you want to just kind of talk about the key new aspects of that, because I'm not as adept on that subject. You're muted.
Apologize. I can't really go into much detail. This was a update to, if you recall, back in 2016, the WIRA 1 Joint Board and the Salmon Recovery Board joined to become the Watershed Management Board. And so doing that, this new Watershed Management Board took on both the update and management of the Watershed Management Plan, but also bringing on the Salmon Recovery Plan. And over the last couple of years, mostly led by the co-managers, which are the 2 tribes and WDFW, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, have been working on key elements of an update to that Salmon Recovery Plan. And so over the last couple of months, specifically with the Watershed Management Team, presentations were made by Lummi and Nooksack on those updates. And I should say back up about a year ago, that update was or did become one of the key objectives or strategies under the Watershed Management Board's 5-year work plan. So on this last Watershed Management Board meeting, a presentation was made on that update. And so the request to the Watershed Management Board was consideration of approval of that update. And so that's really what occurred.
And the centerpiece of that is really a continued focus, or one could even say an increased focus on habitat
Yes, yeah,
creation.
yeah.
And I said in my previous commissioner comments at our last meeting, how that was not at all hatchery focused, which for me was a important understanding and realization that the co-managers all really believe the ball is the thing that needs to be focused on is habitat, very clearly, and we're getting that message over and over again. So some people have made proposals for additional hatcheries and things like that, but that's not the focus in this community. So
I would agree with that, Commissioner, but hatchery, the issue of hatchery and the need for hatchery production as an interim, if you would step to the recovery of especially early Chinook, is becoming a much more key element in the in the process. Yes, the ultimate goal is to improve habitat to the point where you have those resources available for fish production and natural fish production and protection, but hatchery have been raised as a key interim, if you would, to produce, continue to increase the actual production of fish, especially as part of the Southern Orca protection. So.
And I would hope that, thank you, Steve. I would hope that as part of this frustration over California Creek, the California Creek grants, that money, that energy gets redirected in a way that still focuses on habitat and capacity in the tributaries. Despite all the frustration, we still figure out how to get things done as it relates to the tributaries. The other thing that Christine and I both attended was a kind of a press event, but it was actually for me quite educational to visit the Farming for Life exhibit at the Linden Fair. I'd like to ask for a repeat of that, maybe when they're further, so that they did a great job in a very tight timeline to be ready for this year's fair. Things that were, from their perspective, ad hoc, looked quite well done, actually. They did a really good job of making everything presentable. And I think when Commissioner Grant and I were there, they had already had, I think it was 1,400 people or 1,700 people that had already come through and enjoyed the exhibit. So I think they're, in the early stages of a process of ongoing improvement, really probably the right people involved in developing that exhibit. I'd like us to plan to visit again, maybe with a little bit better notice so that all the commissioners can attend, and hopefully we can also convince Commissioner McClure to see the fruits of some of his labor too. So anyway, it was a good exhibit. It was a good opportunity to see something that's unique as far as fairs go, because when you go to a fair, you see all this stuff of what the produce of the agriculture community is, the end product, the animals, the things like that, the crafts, but what's behind all of that is kind of what the Farming for Life exhibit shows, that what's a little bit of view into the culture and the history, and as well as where things are headed as far as agriculture. And I think it's a good exhibit to have. It's quite actually, you could spend several hours in that exhibit. There's a lot of information, and as they figure out how to make all that information packageable and understandable for the general public to the level of for all the different kinds of peoples that walk through there. Some people will be very knowledgeable to start with, and some people will not be. And so it's a tall order to build an exhibit like that to to meet all the people where they're at, which is in totally different places as it relates to understanding agriculture. But I enjoyed the short experience. I wish I could have been there to stay there longer that day. And but it was a good opportunity, and I'd like to ask that we maybe plan to go back there as a group. Although we wouldn't be able to nibble on fried food because it won't be during the fair. So maybe we can each bake muffins or something like that. Bring something for sure. All right, Mike, go ahead.
This is for you all, Tul and Steve. Because you brought up California Creek, which made me think of other projects, and because the county is going to receive $45 million, is that something that you and Steve could do, address that with the county executive about maybe some of that money being looked at, funneled towards any of these kind of projects?
Commissioner, I can tell you that I've had 2 discussions already with the county executive and deputy county executive and Gary Stoika at Public Works, who works extensively on watershed management projects, and also just recently with the director of county planning and development about that very same thing. So it's on our radar screen. We're having discussions. In fact, county executive a couple of weeks ago specifically asked us for ideas on how to utilize some of those funds to look at infrastructure, water infrastructure, and working with and for that initiative that you've included, finding ways to provide water to those in need. So we've been having those discussions, and I would expect that in the next month or so that we might have some actual dollars that we can look to apply. So.
Thank you.
Steve, you sent out an email like a week and a half ago about the county executive's current ideas on. Is there an update to that, or?
I don't have any further update, Commissioner, right now. We've got a planned meeting on Friday morning to discuss that further. So I don't have.
Okay, so if I have input for you, I should get it to you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything further regarding commissioner reports? Great. Well, let's move on to public comment. Anne, is there any public comment?
Not at this time.
I thought at least PSC would be harassing us on why 3% is good enough. Because I believe they're at well below a percent as far as losses in their distribution. Anyway, but okay. Well, with no further public comment, is there anything else for the good of the order? Great. Well, thank you. I'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Whatcom PUD of August 24th to close, and we'll see you on September 14th.